Tommy is back, and with his pink headband, he is going to drop some historical facts on everybody's favorite kind of guitars, the sharp and pointies. Something that I firmly believe began roughly in the late 50s when Gibson was trying to get some youngsters to buy their guitars. They were viewed as the grandfather guitar company.
You
And
are very correct.
yeah, because Fender was taking the market.
Oh, Fender was kicking their butts. They really were, And then we went down that rabbit hole before when we were talking about the Les Paul, and now we look at the Les Paul as this unbelievably, undeniably iconic guitar, which of course it is. Got one right there behind me,
I was
but
going to
it was
say,
a
perfect
failure.
sits
Yeah,
behind you.
it was a failure, and they discontinued the thing. People just forget about that. But yeah, if you want to talk about failures, though. The pointy guitars, boy, those failed hard, as you probably are aware by the way you're laughing right now. They failed super hard.
I think it was the Firebird in 58, only 50 ever sold.
No, no, it's not the Firebird. So it was Ted McCarty, which we talked about before when we talked about the development of Les Paul. And he was a visionary for that company back in the 50s. And it's a shame that so many of the things that he spearheaded bombed in that decade because they've become like they've since become synonymous with everything that we think is cool about guitars. And he was behind the futuristic shapes they launched in the late 50s, and there were three of them. And two of them very well, one of them being the Explorer, one of them being the Flying V, and one of them being the Modern or whatever. Have you ever seen a Modern?
Modern.
Modern?
Those very oddly sounding names.
Yeah.
Uh,
And when they launched the Explorer, it was called the Futura. And the Flying V was just, I think, called the Flying V. And the Modern looked like the top half of a Flying V, but the bottom of it was a big curved swoosh. And the Flying V and the Explorer failed horribly, and they made almost none of both. And that's what you're thinking of when you mentioned the Firebird. And but the Modern, no one is actually sure how many they ever actually built. There had to have been at least a couple of prototypes that never got sold. There was apparently some kid in the 60s that took the prototype off the shelf and went and did a gig with his band and then returned it to the prototype room. And it's theorized that it just got destroyed, like often companies will do with prototypes. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top swears that he owns one of the original 50s prototypes, but refuses to show it to anyone. And he's known for telling very tall tales. So it is very possible that that no original prototype Moderns, however many they made, like two or three, if that many, none of them survived. But they have the blueprints, which were done up at the same time as the Flying V and the Futura, which became the Explorer. But yeah, they died. They died really bad. And what they were trying to do, not only were they trying desperately to wrest the market control away from Fender, who were just killing them in every way, but they were also trying to say, okay, what are the guitars of the future? Because the 50s was the dawn of the space age. It was the atomic age. And, it was big tail fins on everything because it's the future. We're a couple of years away from the Jetsons where they're trying to envision, well, what's the world going to look like in 50, 60 years? Well, flying cars and houses in the sky. And if I can digress for just a little bit, if that's okay, I was actually having a conversation recently, and I forget what got us on this subject, but it was basically talking about, oh, I remember what it was. I was doing an episode of the As It Should Be podcast. We were talking about our favorite instrumentals, and my favorite instrumental of all time is Telstar by the Tornadoes. It's produced by Joe Meek, and how every time I listen to that song, it sounds still to me like the future. It is what they thought the future was going to sound like all the way back in the very early 60s. And to me, I listened to that song, and it is the sound of the future we were robbed of. The Jetsons is an example of the future we were robbed of. Flying V's and Explorers and huge tail fins on cars and flying cars and hoverboards and all these things are the future we were robbed of. And at the time, in the 50s, in the early 60s, people had no reason not to believe that this wasn't the future we were heading for. If you look back to the turn of the century, 1900, and somebody who was a child then, and if you look at all the technological advances year after year, um, the birth of flight. And then it became now we're using something that didn't exist 10 years ago, and now we're using it to bomb other countries. And then we're using it to fly people around as passengers. And we're looking at the dawn of the atomic age. And it's every 10 years, the advances in technology are such that it's blowing people's minds. And now we've got television. And then there's television in every home. And it wasn't just something that was shown at a World's Fair in the 30s. People had no reason to think that something like the Flying V and a flying car weren't pointing towards a future that was inevitably going to get there. And then everything kind of petered off. And now we still have advances in technology, mostly in computers and downsizing tech like that. But in terms of now we're all going to work in jetpacks, which was what people in the 50s were thinking of when they were like envisioning something like a Gibson Explorer. That never quite got here. But at the time, they had every reason to believe that's where we were heading. And that's what gave us these insane pointy shaped guitars that the public took one look at and were like, yeah. And these things sat unsold in guitar stores for years and no one wanted them. And it's hilarious because if you had an original Explorer from like 1958 and you had one now, yeah, you sell it and buy a house. You know what I mean?
Buy like three houses
Buy like three houses, but at the
for
time you couldn't give the damn things away. It was like, yeah, you might think this is the future, but we think this is dumb and we don't want them. So
it.
I sorry for the digression, but it helps paint a picture of, well, where the hell did these insane futuristic shapes come from? Why would they think that this was a thing anyone was going to want?
I thought really it was based off of some like very out there car shapes at the time. Like I know that there was a car called the Flying V, and they were trying to appeal to the kids. Uh,
They were that's definitely a part of it, but those car shapes, the gigantic tail fins on 57 Bel Airs and Cadillacs, the concept cars that had bubble domes and had like
yeah,
rocket engines in them. These weren't coming out of a bubble. I mean, out of like thin air. I mean, there was something that fueled all of that,
yeah, and it
and it's the
was
same thing that fueled these guitar shapes.
yeah, and it was fueled by this desire to get into space and normalize space travel, and everything was all about what's the future gonna be like.
Absolutely. I can't look back on this and blame these forward-thinking designers, even in the slightest, because I genuinely believe they had every reason to think logically, this is where things were headed. We need to be forward-thinking. What is the car of tomorrow? The the mode of transportation of tomorrow, the musical instrument of tomorrow, the outfit of tomorrow. There was no reason not to believe this wasn't where society was heading. It just unfortunately wasn't quite where it was headed. And it would have been really cool if it was. I mean, we got a little glimpse of that with the Back to the Future series. Now, I believe I'm a few years older than you, but still, I'm sure that you watched the Back to the Future movies when you were a lot younger, just like I did. And you see
Oh
the
yeah.
hoverboards and the flying cars, and you're like, well, okay, yes, sign me up. Well, we never got there. But they again thought that that's probably where shit was heading, and it didn't quite get there. But you could see how people in the 50s and the early 60s might have kind of been thinking the same thing. And
I mean,
instead, the
you got
guitar sat unsold.
We got the motors and the skateboards now, but
We got the motors in the skateboard, but we didn't get the coolest part of the damn skateboards, unfortunately.
we don't have the hover skateboards at this point.
We
Yeah.
don't. We don't. But
So,
that's kind of what led to these insane shapes. And they ended up being incredibly ahead of their time, but for quite some time, they were unwanted.
yeah,
And
far out of this world.
they
Was
were
there?
too far out of this world. And it wasn't for, quite a few years before crazy out there guitar shapes found a welcome audience, which we probably want to talk about too.
So I think primarily we all know where Flying V's come into rock and roll is when Jimi Hendrix was sitting out there playing in From the Storm at Isle of Wight.
Saw this throughout the 60s. I mean, guitar manufacturers were always willing to take some risks and everything. And you'll find it almost any year some kind of wackadoo thing that just never went anywhere. People just experimenting with different stuff. And like now let's build the speakers in and have 70 different knobs and switches on there. Um and people really didn't even know what to do with the Flying V's that were on the market. Like you could find footage of Dave Davies from the Kinks, the lead guitarist of the Kinks in the early 60s. He got his hands on a Flying V, and
Yep.
you could find him, and he's in the video. Let me grab my Flying V because it's something that really I need to demonstrate this for people to understand. This is a 1983 Flying V. This is a Gibson. It's called the V83. It's without the pick guard. These are the ones I prefer. And the footage of Dave Davies from the Kinks playing it, he's got the strap way, way up high, total goober style. And he's got his arm in it like this, and he's playing it like this, coming in through the bottom of the V. And it's like you watch this and you're like, no, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then, like Albert King, the blues guitarist,
Oh yeah.
he had one that, he's kind of famously associated with. But yeah, Hendrix, I think you're right. Hendrix really started getting people to pay attention to them. Um, and then in the 70s, they became more and more popular with rock bands, hard rock bands, early metal bands. And you had, of course, Michael Schenker came along in the mid 70s. And like when you think Flying V, you think Michael Schenker.
Yeah.
And what that man did with a Flying V is just like,
And
yeah,
we also had the Edge in the 70s too, bringing in,
Explorer.
yeah, not just the Explorer, but also he was so I think he was kind of like the first like super tech welcoming rock star where he's like, well, actually, I think this is going to give us a chance to see where this is going to take us. I think rock and
Yeah,
roll
Edge was
always,
really forward thinking. He always had that kind of mentality. And he gets a lot of crap as being like, oh, all he's doing is just using a lot of delay. It's like, okay, yes, he's using a lot of delay, but you're grossly oversimplifying what the man is doing. The guy is like, I want to incorporate all this studio gadgetry and all these effects processors as part of my sound and as part of my rhythm. And he's writing parts to these devices. He's crafting like these sonic landscapes that are just stunning.
yeah.
And he yeah, we don't have to go too far down the Edge rabbit hole, but I think he doesn't get the respect he deserves.
No, he
Um,
doesn't. I mean, he does what a
no.
lot of guitar players, especially like that, like his idols, how, they have a very simple, they go like, start simple, play very simplistic. And
Yeah.
he's able to do a lot of impressive work just with that alone.
Yes.
And funny, I mean, I just find it kind of funny because there's so many people that are so tech obsessive, like the followers of no disrespect towards Joe Satriani or Steve Vai, awesome guitar players. But
Steve Vai, right there.
yeah, even though those guys aren't very like tech heavy, I find that a lot of people in that following become super tech heavy.
Yep. Guilty as charged.
Yep. So we're there, speaking along the lines of technology when these guitars first started coming out before we get into their big blow up. Was there anything technologically different about these? Like, was there something maybe with like wiring or pickups that may have not been done previously?
No, there wasn't. Not really, not really. So 57 is the year that the Les Paul appeared with humbuckers. And to me, 57 is really when the Les Paul has finally arrived. I mean, they obviously, as we talked before in the Les Paul episode, they originated in the early 50s and they experimented with different bridge designs, different neck angles, and they had P90s, which not really is the whole Les Paul with P90s thing, but 57,
Gave me
you get
every reason not to
57,
pick one up ever.
what?
I said you gave me every reason never to pick one up ever.
Oh yeah. But yeah, in 57 is when you can get a Gibson Gold Top Les Paul with PAF humbuckers in it. And this is right around the time when they were working on the designs for the Futura slash Explorer, the Flying V, and the ill-fated Moderne. So basically everything that they had worked out for the Les Paul at that point, the two-pneumatic bridge as we've come to know it, the PAF humbuckers, they just used all those same electronics in the Flying V and the Explorer. So um, they really weren't going and doing something completely wacky and different with the Explorer and the Flying V as far as electronics wise that they weren't already putting into the Les Paul.
Right on, right on.
Yeah. Really, basically, they were just like, let's really push the envelope with shapes. Now, there were tons of different electronic developments that occurred over the course of the 60s. You could find, as I refer to, wackadoo shapes and wackadoo designs that had all kinds of wackadoo electronics. Fender really started doing goofy stuff. It's not out right now, it's still away, but my wife has a Jag Stang that's got some goofy 60s style Fender electronics where all the it's like slide switches on the top that you can turn this way or that way to turn a pickup on and off, this way or that way to turn the neck pickup on and off. And if you have them both going that way, they're both on, but now they're out of phase with each other. Like really, really screwy stuff like that. And these things were all kind of going on separately from Gibson exploring some really forward-thinking futuristic shapes. Um,
Sounds like a me guitar.
it's oh, you would probably dig the heck out of this thing, yeah.
The more options, the better.
Oh yeah, yeah, and lots of different goofy, lesser known guitars from the '60s. That's where you'll really find a lot of really out there, like just like what are we even trying to accomplish sonically kind of electronics developments. The 60s, a lot of the shapes kind of stayed a lot more reserved in the 60s, and they tried really pushing the envelope with electronics in the 60s. Lots of the shapes in the 60s were kind of like, okay, we've got tellies, we've got strats. How can we kind of just like play with where the curves land on those and make them different for different forms of different vaguely strat-esque blobs, and then just go nuts with the electronics. And now there's like, 40 switches on the stupid thing. And then of course, that reached its kind of zenith with the BC Rich electronics in the early to mid 70s, where Neil Moser just had a stroke apparently, and it was like everything and chicken head knobs and five toggles and eight pots and
One
you
instrument
know
that sounds like 40.
exactly. And right behind me we've got like the Mockingbird, where it's like too much controls, the BC Rich bitch with even more controls, and it's like just don't even hook all that crap up. You just want the bridge pickup with the volume with and tone all the way up. Who are we even kidding? But they were really going nuts with them. Actually, one shape that's kind of goofy in the early 70s. Have you ever heard of an Ovation breadwinner?
God, I gotta look that one up now.
Look that one up really quick. I have a friend out in the Pacific Northwest who has one, and when he went to the store in 1972, he's a
Yeah,
lot older
I
than I am. He
do
went to the
know
store
what these
in
are.
1972 and to buy his first big boy guitar. And he had gone to the store with the intention of buying an Ovation breadwinner because he had seen an advertisement for one. And instead, he bought a 1972 Les Paul Custom. And at the time, I think he was like, I don't know, did I make the right decision? Well, he still has that exact 1972 Les Paul Custom to this day. So he
Nice.
clearly made the right decision. But last year or a year and a half ago, he found somebody selling like an immaculate condition Ovation breadwinner from 1972 for like $800. Whereas you're not buying a 1972 Les Paul Custom for that price, especially not in gorgeous condition. So he bought the Ovation breadwinner to kind of close the circle of the guitar that he never bought back in 1972 when he was a kid. And we refer to it as the lollipop guitar because it looks like just a big blob, like somebody spilled some juice on a table and was like, I like this shape. Let's make a guitar like that. And they put a bunch of goofy
Lollipop someone took
controls
a
on
bite
it.
out
Are you looking at a picture of it right now?
of. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the early 70s, and Ovation was like, let's do this shape because maybe it'll work. And there's some footage and a photo of Ace Frehley in the very early like months of Kiss before he got his Les Pauls, and that was like his classic signature whole thing where he's playing one of those Ovation breadwinners on stage with Kiss in like the early proto version of his makeup, and he's playing this goofy lollipop shaped guitars, but it didn't catch on like at all. Like no one cared. But people tried, guitar companies still tried to think outside of the box with shapes. And it wasn't until the mid 70s that it really happened. And what really, really made it happen, it kicked down the door, in addition to like Michael Schenker putting the V on the map. And and obviously the V, they had brought the V back into production. And that's how, like, Jimi Hendrix got his hands on like flying V's, and some people were buying V's in the early 70s. But the Explorer, now we talked before about the lawsuit guitars that the Japanese manufacturers started making in the 70s, where they were just basically cloning iconic or out of production American guitar shapes. And the Japanese didn't do anything half-ass. So if the Japanese made a knockoff of like a Les Paul, it's like top shelf, top of the line. Like that natural finish BC Rich Bitch is actually a Greco BB 1000 from 1980, and they ripped off the bitch, and they clearly got their hands on a real one from like 78 or 79 and put their best guys on it. And let me tell you something. I got replacement parts for that thing from Neil Moser, the guy that designed the BC Rich bitch for BC Rich in the late 70s. And Neil Moser's replacement parts for that fit a counterfeit from Japan. That's how good of a job the Japanese counterfeit companies did. And that's a Greco, and it's from their Super Real series. So Ibanez in the mid 70s, I believe in 75, if I'm not mistaken, decided, hey, Gibson made like 50 of these Gibson Explorers and then gave up because none of them sold. Let's make a Gibson Explorer and we'll call it a Ibanez Destroyer. And it was a dead nuts copy and a beautiful guitar. And they started shipping them to the US, and people were buying them up like crazy. The guitarists from Twisted Sister, before they were famous and they were just a huge club band out of Long Island, JJ French and Eddie Ojeda, they each bought one in 75, 76 in natural finish. And JJ very famously had his repainted in black with a dragon inlay on it. And it said Twisted Sister on the headstock. Um, and they were selling like crazy. And Gibson was like, wait, WTF, what is going on? Who is this company in Japan that is making these beautiful, beautiful, high quality guitars that is literally our shape? And now all of a sudden people want them when almost decades ago we couldn't give these things away. Okay, maybe we need to make them again. And we need to serve these companies over in Japan with cease and desists. Stop making these Ibanez destroyers. So in the very late 70s, Ibanez got the message and they kind of reconfigured what the body and the headstock looked like. And they no longer looked like exact clones of the Gibson Explorer. And they changed the body shape just a little bit, made like the little, if you can compare right here, I've got some Gibson Explorers here, and I've got an Ibanez Destroyer, and you can see how they kind of played with the cuts, the rear of the body. They of course applied their classic Ibanez headstock, and that became what the Ibanez Destroyer was known as, and was no longer an exact lawsuit worthy copy of the Gibson Explorer. But I mean, the cat was out of the bag at that point, and people were like, "Oh yeah, we got to get these pointy shaped guitars." The hard rock and heavy metal bands in the late 70s, they all started being associated with Explorers and Destroy and Flying V's. People got the memo at that point, and now it's like, "Oh, we got to make these guitars." And actually, I'll tell you what, Ibanez wasn't even the only ones that really kicked down the doors. Now you're familiar with Hamer.
Yeah, funny enough, there were it was Gary's, I think it was. There were a couple of Hamers in there, and one was like an old double cut. It was like 20 or 30 years. I think it was like 30 years old, I think. Because I remember the guy that I was playing guitar with that year, who was like yeah, he had a collection of old guitars, and he's like, "What the fuck were you thinking? You didn't get it?" Like he totally lost it on me. I'm like, I don't know anything about the like I just
You can't, dude, you can't get everything right, man.
yeah. Well, I was like I think what? I was like 20, 21. So that was like when I was just starting to really learn about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was when I was starting to learn about it. I wasn't just playing this silly instrument for fun anymore. I was interested in learning about it, getting serial.
Super cereal.
Super serial.
Um,
Derangedly obsessed.
yep.
It was probably a lot of better things I could have done with my time.
Ah, but but yeah, so Hamer. Um, so I'm going on and on and on and on about how Ibanez shipping pallet loads, crate loads of these Explorer copies called the Destroyer, and then Gibson was like, no, 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 no. Seize these freaking crates at the dock. This is insane. What are they doing? But the same decade in the 70s, now that's where Hamer got their origins. Now, Hamer started out as just a couple of guys that worked at like a music store and had their own music store. And they were just vintage guitar resellers. They were like the ones that were very forward thinking in the early 70s, saying, okay, rock stars are flipping out over these late 50s Les Pauls that no one else seems to care about, but let's buy them and sell them to rock stars when they're on tour for a profit. Let's buy up vintage guitars and sell them for a profit. Like, let's make the whole vintage guitar thing an industry back in a time when it was the early 70s and there weren't vintage guitars weren't a thing. It was just guitars and old guitars. And they learned so much during the course of this in the first couple of years and like repairing them and getting them ready, setting them up to getting ready to resell. They were like, could we make a guitar? I guess maybe we have the know-how. So what they decided to make, because Gibson wasn't making the Explorer anymore, they made the Hamer Standard, which was a Gibson Explorer. They changed the control configuration a little bit and got rid of the ugly ass pick guard, and they put a gorgeous flame maple flame top on it. Did burst paint job on it, gorgeous flame top. Did binding and just like next level, like we're talking top of the line looking. It was like they made it like if like the most gorgeous flame top 59 burst was an Explorer instead with no pickguard. And that became the Hamer standard. And people were like, what is this? And within a very short period of time, people were like, yo, these Hamer standards. And Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick got like the prototype. I think it's serial number 0000. And then he famously refused to return it. And he still has it to this day. Like he effectively stole it. But he's Rick Nielsen and he became famous. And we're like, let's leave this alone. He's still got it. It's fine. Um, so that was another thing. It was like, who the hell are these Hamer guys? They're making an Explorer.
The
And so Gibbs is like,
beginning
we
of
need to make Explorers.
the beginning of gorgeous knockoffs.
Yeah, like people clearly wanted Explorers and Gibson wasn't making them. And so then I think this, if it's okay with you, segue into the Dean conversation. So Dean Zelinsky was just a kid who dreamed of being a luthier and having a guitar company. And he started making, again, these really wacky, shaped guitars, one of them being an Explorer shaped guitar. And he came up with his own headstock, obviously. And there's two Dean headstocks. There's the big, crazy one that you associate with Dimebag from Pantera, like the classic, oversized, enormous Dean headstock. And then there's what's known as, I think, the shrimp headstock, which I think is hideous. And somebody recently
Go big or
offered to
go home
trade
in
me.
Tommy's world.
Yeah, somebody recently offered to trade me one of my vintage JMPs down there straight up for, I think it was an 82 or an 83 Dean Z with the shrimp headstock and like mint condition white with all the trimmings. And I had to turn it down because I couldn't get past the headstock. I just hated it. It wasn't speaking my language. But here's another guy, Dean, who's like, okay, these rock and these metal bands, they want these pointy shapes. Let's make some pointy shaped guitars. And Gibson's been asleep at the wheel for I don't know how many years. They haven't done anything to safeguard their trademark, clearly. So let's go ahead and let's make a Dean Explorer. Let's make a Dean V. And Gibson really screwed up because they did not go after anybody initially that made a V, that made an Explorer shape. And this kept going through the 80s. Like Hamer put out the Hamer Blitz, which was a lower price version of the Hamer Standard. It was just an Explorer shape. And you can get even a Hamer Blitz with the Gibson Explorer hockey stick shape. And Gibson never went after them. Dean kept making the Dean Explorer shape and the Dean V shape all through the 80s, all through the 90s. Gibson never actually really formally went after anyone. Now, Gibson put out their own Explorers and their own Vs all through the 80s. The Explorers that I have, the Flying V that I have, they're from 1983 is my Explorer, and I have my Flying V, and I have two 84 Explorers. I have an 85 Explorer, and you can get the Explorers without and the Vs without the pick guards. You can get them with the pick guards, which were the classic like reissues of the late 50s ones. They in the early 80s, they even finally were like, okay, hey, remember that Modern that we never made? Let's make that. So in the early 80s, they actually made some Moderns, but they didn't make many of them because, again, they didn't really sell worth a damn because they're ugly as crap. So if you have an early 80s Modern, that's worth a fortune. And that's just a reissue of a guitar that never went to proper production in the late 50s because people are like, we don't want this V and we don't want this Explorer, so we damn sure aren't going to want the Modern. But in the early 80s, where they were like, okay, wacky shapes are in, pointy shapes are in, let's make the Modern. It still didn't sell well. But now in the 80s, everyone got the memo. So now everyone in the 80s, all the guitar manufacturers, they're all like, we need to make pointy guitars. There's even some Fender crazy pointy guitars, which didn't really sell well because it's not what people wanted from Fenders. But like every company in the 80s, BC Rich went insane with the pointy shapes. The Warlock, I've got one of those. Warlock sold like hotcakes in the 80s. Then they
And the
came
name
out
of
with
an
the
awesome
Iron
band.
Bird. They came out with the Stealth. They came out with any kind of crazy pointy shape you could think of. the 80s became like not only the era of the Super Strat, but also the era of guitars as pointy as you can get. So like the 80s finally were like the future as far as guitar shapes that Ted McCarty in the late 50s was really hoping for in the late 50s. And we were finally there. Now it's all pointy shapes. Too far away from such a ridiculous concept. It's like basically like, oh, a big, like inverted triangle that you can't really, like, there's nothing about it that looks good.
Holy
I'll
shit.
tell you what, you want
Even
to know the
Guild
worst?
was
The
trying to make MLs in the 80s.
Guild? Oh, dude, Guild. There's a Guild. God damn, do I wish I'd have gotten my hands on one of these, but now the prices are even
Flying
worse.
Star.
So in 85, Guild put out something called, I think, the X100 Blade Runner. And Joe Perry from Aerosmith famously plays a black one in the video they did for Walk This Way, the version with Run DMC. And it's like kind of like an Explorer shaped guitar, but like all hollow and like cut, like so it's just like the outline of the edge of it. And it is the craziest, goofiest looking thing. Oh yeah, the Flying Star. Yep, the Flying Star. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And there's also a crazy looking shaped guild that Steven Van Zandt from the E Street Band plays, and his is zebra striped. I don't know if you remember that guitar. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. There's the Blade Runner, Joe Perry's Blade Runner. And they made a hot pink one of these, and it's amazing. Look at that thing. And they made like 100 of the Blade Runners in like 84 or 85. My God, how cool is that? That guitar is like, I'm ready to be in Gem and the Holograms with that guitar. Like, are you kidding me?
That movie should have been in the Blade Runner.
That, I mean,
This should have been
how
like
beautiful is that? So this is what, yeah, and okay, wait,
like
zoom in.
something you'd give a kid. Like
You see the all right, look up Steven Van Zandt and then look up and add zebra guitar.
oh, I think it was from Into the
Yeah.
Darkness music video.
Yeah, and he uses this in the video for Glory Days too. Look at this pointy, glorious zebra stripe thing. How cool. And that's another guild, by the way.
It's like Flying V's unwanted child.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So this didn't sell worth a crap, but Fender was trying to like, okay, this is what people want. But now I'm gonna have you look up something, and you got it. People have to see this of a guitar that literally sunk a company. Look up Kramer Gorky Park.
I've seen these.
So that is from 1989. And this basically killed the company at this point. They were already in trouble, and then they did this, and they made a ton of them. And my dude, you can still find mint condition ones of these for sale on Reverb and eBay all the time for like 500 to $1,000. They're basically it's a huge unplayable triangle, and it is the stupidest pointy guitar. And it's like, of course, by 1989 pointy
Let's take the
guitars reached
stereo.
the point where they were just the dumbest thing ever.
Let's take the
Um,
drawing design of a broom that of like an old school corn broom that some
yeah,
child tried drawing and turn it into a guitar.
yeah.
What
And
like Soviet
what is the
Union American flag stuff?
oh yeah. What is the Fender? No, the Kramer. What? Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh my God. Okay, okay, okay. Look up Kramer TriAxe. TriAX. My God, people are gonna bug out at these pointy guitars we're showing them. No, TRIA. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah.
when
Look at
old school
this.
video games become guitars.
Look at that. The headstock looks like a freaking Nintendo Switch controller, just pointier.
This is
Is that
like
crazy or
an
what?
old arcade game like Space Invaders, just as a guitar shape.
Well, I don't know. It depends. I would be more concerned with actually how well it balances because with that much extra mass on the headstock, I would worry that it would be a
Enterprise.
little neck heavy. Yeah,
A
Enterprise
Kramer
with a Z.
Enterprise. Oh my God.
So when you look at these and leave these up on the screen for a second here, when I mentioned how in the 60s,
Oh, this looks
while they weren't
dangerous.
trying to push the envelope with shapes too much in the 60s, a lot of different companies were trying to really get as crazy and wacky as they could with controls. You would see guitars with 3 pickups, 4 pickups, 5 pickups, more switches and knobs than a plane needs.
Wasn't
They
there
were
like the
always trying to push the envelope when something
triple
seemed like it
coil
was
pickup
popular.
invented?
The what?
Isn't this when the triple coil, sorry to interrupt you, but this was when the triple coil pickup was invented.
Oh, yeah, people were going crazy with that. Yeah. But like how we saw in the 60s with people going too far with different control configurations, once it became apparent in the early 80s that pointy guitars were absolutely hot and they will absolutely sell, every guitar manufacturer out there was trying to come up with the craziest stuff they possibly could. Um, Look up Hondo Death Dagger.
Mondo Death Dagger.
Hondo Death Dagger.
I actually do want to try, like, listen to how this actually sounds.
Yeah, they made almost none of them. You're never going to find one in person. Yeah, Death Dagger. I'd love to have one of those Kramer TriAxes, but you can't find them. Look at
Oh,
this insane thing.
I should call Kramer. Hey guys, can I get a TriAxe? Can I get a special order? Can you make it
Special
like
order
spark? Can you
TriAxe.
make a pink burst? A
A
sparkle
pink
pink
burst
burst.
TriAxe. Look at this ridiculous thing. This is when pointy guitars reach the point of, no pun intended, of just you could use this as a weapon.
This should have just been called. Well, no wonder this is called the Death Dagger. You could stab someone's jugular in the audience if you lean the wrong way.
This is the stupidest. I know somebody who has one of these, and his is tiger striped. Yeah, yeah.
Is it like a
That
museum
headstock
piece?
is a
Is he
part.
hanging above his fireplace?
Yeah, that no, it's just in his workshop. That headstock is a harpoon.
Yeah.
So by the end of the 80s, yeah, I know.
I like how they're
But
trying to
I
use
know, I
Wonder Woman to
know.
sell this. And then you have this other guitar right
I don't
here,
even know what that is.
which is like what? This is what you I feel like these are the guitars you'd take like to the modern day metal shows where like the
Yeah,
music's way more tame, but the audience is like 100 times more dangerous.
yeah. Oh, you could see there's another one. There's a black one right down to the left in the case. You see it where it says 89 Hondo?
Honda,
Yeah.
there's no name for it.
I wonder what I don't even know what this thing is called.
Hey,
Hondo H9 H794. So anyway, so by the end of the 80s, this had reached the point where it was just insane.
yeah,
And that's when you see stuff like the Kramer Gorky Park, where they just couldn't get rid of them. And this all kind of reached the point where it was so crazy and so insane that with the influx of grunge, and people were all like, my God, no, no pointy guitars, no hot pink guitars, no none of this. We want 60 style strat shapes. We want Les Pauls again, and we want combo amps. So everything always reaches the point, and once anything is hot in the guitar gear industry, it always gets to the point where it becomes completely saturated in the market and also reaches the point where there's a bunch of things on the market that are just stupid beyond belief. And then everyone has this big reaction to it. It's like, oh, no, 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 no. We never thought that was cool. Get rid of all this. None of that. We don't want to buy any of that. We need the exact opposite of all of that. And that happened with pointy guitars in the 90s. The 80s just took it way too far.
Like at what point? I wonder, it probably has this thing has to sound terrible. There's like no wood to it, no body, nothing.
Yeah, I would feel like this one would really sound like crap. I think that I think the natural resonance of that thing would be severely compromised.
I mean, it's the ideal self-defense weapon, but
Sure, yeah, but like, what are we even doing here if that's your guitar? Like,
yeah.
that's just dumb.
Was it just the shape, or was there like any absurd electronics too that like totally turned people off? I know that you and I talked our first interview about how there was just so many electronics and BC Rich, people would just rip them out and then just wire them like a regular Les Paul or something like that.
Yeah, with the crazy shaped guitars, getting back to what we said earlier about with the unloved and unwanted early flying V's and Explorers from the late 50s. They just basically used a variation of the humbucker basic controls that were going into the Les Paul. That never really changed. That's the thing. With these crazy shaped guitars, other than what BC Rich was doing, everybody else that was coming to the table with a wild pointy guitar, wild shaped guitar, they were just giving people, the players, what they knew the players actually wanted. Now, they would change it up a little bit. You'd have like maybe it's two humbuckers, one for the bridge, one for the neck. Sometimes you'll have it where it's three humbuckers, bridge, middle, and neck. Sometimes you'll have a variation of like what the super strats typically would have was a bridge humbucker and then a middle single coil and a neck single coil. Or sometimes you'd have a pointy shaped guitar that's got a bridge humbucker and a neck single coil. But it would generally have like some variation of either a separate volume and a separate tone for each pickup, or like a master volume for both pickups, or and a master tone for both pickups, or a master volume for both pickups and a separate tone for control for each pickup. Or sometimes you'll have a couple toggles on there that can give you coil splitting. It never got much crazier than that. If you had a guitar that came with active pickups like EMGs, it was still going to just be like bridge and neck humbucker. They weren't really going too much crazier than what I just said as far as controls, because for the most part, the guitar manufacturers knew what the players wanted. And it was just more like, okay, we need a pointy guitar, but it's got to be our flavor of pointy guitar. We know they want a super distortion or a Duncan JB in the bridge, and some form of neck PAF for the neck, but it's going to have an even sharper point on the body, and that's going to be what sets us apart. And we're going to have our own colors, and we'll call it, cocaine sparkle white, and electric panther pink, or whatever kind of wacky color names they would come up with. But the controls weren't something that people went too crazy with, surprisingly enough, in the 80s. It was everything else that they really tried to push the envelope with, really. Much
Okay.
to disappoint you as far as my answer to the question.
No, it explains a lot because I'm always curious if there was like a certain design because we talked with Les Paul and like from the history I had heard, it almost sounded like the Les Paul kind of just came out naturally the way it was. And they were just kind of making it throughout the years. And, as Gibson regained popularity, the Les Paul, became excuse me, a perfect object for rock and roll musicians. Um, but this is an interesting picture though to look at to see um, up close, kind of uh, that it wasn't necessarily like the technology. That it was just something that, was like really big and really popular in the 80s. And then when grunge came out, everybody's like, well, forget these pointy shapes. It's oversaturated and it's too ridiculous. And um,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Well,
definitely.
here's the thing. Here's the thing. when it comes to all the different crazy shapes and everything, it was really truly never really was so much about how much different does a V-shaped guitar sound versus a Les Paul shaped guitar, because I won't go too deep down the rabbit hole because it's already been almost an hour down the rabbit hole of like the different acoustic properties and all that of these different guitars, but it's not what people often think it is. And the reason why I say that is because you could have an Explorer, you could have a Flying V, you could have a Jackson Kelly, you could have some Kramer Superstrat. And depending upon the woods they used to build them for the body and the neck, whether or not it's set neck or bolt neck, what kind of pickups you have in it, you could be surprised to find that they either sound extremely similar or like they were built on another planet in a separate century. And that is because it's not so much about the shape. And in some regards, it's almost not about the shape. It's the construction technique and the woods you use. And to really drive that point home, I have several late 80s BC Rich gunslingers. That winter camo one behind me is made of poplar with a maple neck, maple board, Jescar 55090 stainless steel frets, flat mount lockdownable Kaler trim, and the bridge pickup is a Seymour Duncan RTM, which stands for Ratus Tonus Maximus, is the Warren DeMartini signature pickup from Rat. In fact, that one is signed on the bottom of the pickup by Warren DeMartini himself.
That sounds like the Romans stamp.
Yes, the Ratus Tonus Maximus. Now, the Zebra gunslinger, that is not made of poplar. That is made of alder, but it's got the same bridge pickup, the same RTM bridge pickup. It's got the same bridge. It's got the same maple neck, the same stainless steel Jescar fret wire. When you plug both of those guitars into the same amp, they do not sound the same. That gunslinger in the middle is also an 89 gunslinger. I have to put the pickups in the bridge on it. I just got that back from repair. I've got the same bridge pickup and the same bridge. Okay, the same RTM bridge pickup from Seymour Duncan and the same Kaler flat mount trim. It's got the same kind of maple neck with the same stainless steel Jescar 5509 fret wire. But that body is made of swamp ash. And I bet you that is going to sound different from the other two. Now, if I were to have two bodies built and I wanted them to sound identical, and I had both of them made of alder with all the same specs and all the same parts with the same bridge pickup, I bet you they wouldn't, because no two pieces of the same type of wood sound the same. And that is why, if you were like, well, I want a Flying V because of the Flying V sound, that is a fool's errand, because no two Flying Vs will sound the same. And you stand just as much chance of having a Flying V sound the same as an Explorer. In fact, possibly even a better chance than you do of having two Flying Vs sound the same. So not to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but like, again, like if you were going to ask about, well, if there's any kind of sonic properties that made people want an Explorer suddenly in the 70s, or people want to get, a Flying V in this, it had really nothing to do with the sound, man. It really didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Um, that answers a lot. But last question, craftsmanship. Was this an
Yes.
era of good craftsmanship? Was there just a lot of people running with it and just figuring out as they went along? Is this an era of half good craftsmanship? Was there an advancement in this?
It depends on which era you're talking about. So, and which company. So, if we're talking about the 70s, when Ibanez really kicked the hornet's nest with the introduction of the Destroyer, if you're talking about the Hamer Standard, If we're talking about the original Deans from the late 70s and the early 80s and the mid 80s, where they were just taking these Gibson shapes and making their own versions of them, and in some cases making the exact same thing. Those companies were making absolutely beautiful guitars. They truly were. There's a reason why a 70s or 80s Hamer Standard is a guitar that you do not see on the wall behind me, because I just straight up can't afford one, because they were made so well that they've held their value and gone up exponentially. The actual original run of Ibanez Explorers, which were dead nuts copies of the 50s Explorers, fantastic guitars. The reconfigured Ibanez Destroyer, like I have that 87 up there, fantastic guitars. The Deans, fantastic guitars. The Gibsons, not so much. Now, I have those three Gibson Explorers back there, and those are excellent guitars. They had quality control issues in the 70s and the 80s with Gibson. Those were the years of Henry Juszkiewicz owning the company. When he took over from Norlin around 86, he didn't really right the ship so much. So the mid to late 80s, they still had quality control issues. They were making a lot of the same volume, same styles. The 70s up through the mid 80s were the years where Norlin owned Gibson, and they were famous for their pancake body Les Pauls. Quality control issues, people claiming they don't sound that good. Um, those Explorers behind me, I meticulously had gone through and restored using the best parts possible. Those are excellent guitars now. If you just went into the guitar store in the 80s or the late 70s and just bought an off-the-shelf Gibson, that was a very good chance that it was going to have fit and fitment issues. You would have been better off getting a Hamer or a Dean or an Ibanez. So there again, my answer to that is really, it depends on what company and what year. But we keep talking about Dean, and I know that you said that was your last question, but before we close this, I want to mention how I talked about how Gibson really shot themselves in the foot by never enforcing their trademarks for their body shapes. In recent years, Gibson has really gone kind of crazy with that, and they've gone super litigious, and they're kind of jerks. And I really would not buy a new Gibson, which is sad because the guitars they've been putting out in the last 5 years are some of the finest instruments they've ever made since like the 60s and the 50s. They are really putting the work in as far as quality control. I'll give it to them. They really are. You go and you buy an off-the-shelf Gibson Les Paul Standard or Custom, you're getting a damn good guitar. Beautiful flame tops, beautiful finishes, the fit finish, the quality control. They're really putting the work in ways that they haven't done really in decades. It's always been hit and miss. That 95 Les Paul Standard I have behind me is a fantastic guitar, but a similar 95 Les Paul Standard might have quality control issues, might have a neck that's slightly bent from the factory, might have bad binding. That just happens to be an excellent. But even though Gibson is really putting the work in and making excellent quality guitars now, they've become complete douchebags as far as companies go, and they're trying to sue everybody. They famously sued Dean a few years back, saying, you cannot make the Dean V, you cannot make the Dean Explorer shapes. We're finally enforcing our trademark. And Dean's been like, you haven't paid attention or cared about this in decades. How could you possibly say that you care now? And Dean lost. And Dean filed an appeal. And Dean just lost the appeal like last month. And here's where things get really sticky. Not only did they lose the appeal, saying that you cannot make a Dean V, you cannot make a Dean Explorer shape, but because one of the arguments that Dean's lawyer made, and this is really interesting, is we as a company, Dean Guitars, feels as though guitar shapes cannot be trademarked. So how can Gibson try to go after this? These are practically public domain. There's everyone making Fender-shaped, Strat-shaped guitars and Tele-shaped guitars. There's everybody and their brother has been making different V-shaped and Explorer-shaped and Z-shaped guitars. How could you possibly say that this is a trademark enforceable shape? Guitar shape shouldn't be enforceable. So Gibson, what Gibson is now doing is, even though Gibson won the appeal that Dean filed. Gibson won twice in the last couple of years. Gibson is being punitive and vindictive, and they've just filed yet another suit against Dean, saying, based on the argument that Dean's lawyer filed, we're filing a motion for you to cancel Dean's trademarks for the two Dean shapes that Dean created. So Gibson is trying to get the trademark office in a court of law to cancel Dean's trademark on the only other two Dean shapes that they're known for, which will absolutely f this company over. And there's no reason to do that. And in their motion, and I read it, Gibson's lawyer is saying, while we disagree with what Dean's lawyer said in their motion, based upon what they're saying, we as a company, Gibson, feel you should cancel the remaining Dean trademarks for shapes that Gibson has no claim on. How screwed up is that? The repercussions for the guitar industry here are not good.
Damn.
Yeah, dude. And that's
Cold.
why I wanted to make sure we got this in before we wrap this up because it really matters when we're talking about pointy guitar shapes. That's a real problem because the company that kind of introduced these insane shapes in the first place in the 50s and no one cared about. And then they're like, well, no one cares. We don't care. We're not going to make any more. We don't care. Oh, in the 70s, people are counterfeiting them. People are copying them. Okay, well, maybe don't make them look exactly like ours, but we're not going to trademark and force other Explorer and V shapes. Who cares? We'll make our own and that's fine. And then the 70s drag on and the 80s drag on and the 90s drag on. And we're not going after Hammer. We're not going after Dean. We're not going after Ibanez for making their own versions of V's and Explorers, and they call it the Rocket Roll and the Destroyer. And then Hamer had their own V, and all this stuff, and countless other companies had V's and Explorer shapes. And now, finally, after what are we talking about? 60 years, 70 years since they created these shapes and didn't care. Now they're going after it, and they're going after it so aggressively and so vindictively that they're making themselves look like monsters and it's actually working. And that's not cool. That's not good, man. That's really not good. You don't see Fender doing this. You don't see Fender going after people making super strat shaped guitars. Everyone knows who invented the damn thing. But it's been so long that people have been making variations on those themes that the cat's out of the bag. And Fender as a company is not choosing to be vindictive assholes about it. But Gibson are, man. And it's not okay.
I mean, what precedent does that set at that point? I mean, all right, it's one thing that other companies might want to make your own like their own version of something, or merge something together like Dean made with the ML, but what purpose does it serve? What does
It
Gibson have to gain from it other than, okay, besides the fact that a couple of years ago, instead of donating a bunch of guitars that didn't sell, you chose to run them over with a tractor, and that made you look like big enough assholes already, but now you're suing after suing, winning, and then winning an appeal. You want to sue them again for something you didn't even make or think of.
Gibson has a real problem on their hand. They have been owned for some years now by a private equity firm, which is never good. They are lawsuit happy. They're vindictive about it. And their public relations is horrible. What this is doing to the reputation of them as a company is horrible. People at this point, they know what Gibson's all about. They know decades of inconsistent quality and Gibson being assholes as a company and now being aggressively assholes now. It makes people look at this and being like, oh, I don't even care if you directly stole a shape directly from Gibson, like you just waltzed in there in the middle of the night and stole their blueprints. I don't even care. They look like such jerks. I don't want them to win. I'm going to find a way to buy a guitar from the person who's stealing your shape. I'm going to buy an ESP Les Paul knockoff because you know what? It's probably been a better made guitar for years with a better neck heel for upper fret access. Like Gibson's making themselves look like jerks and it's really bad.
And
It's
speaking
really
from
bad.
experience, those knockoff companies do make better better
They
than
do. They do. You can go and you can get yourself a Les Paul from ESP, like a high-end ESP, direct from Japan, and have an incredibly high quality instrument.
Or LT or their
Or the
smaller company,
LTD.
LTD,
The
which
LTD, which is like their lower price line, is still an excellent guitar.
yeah, it still matches up to their custom to Gibson's custom shop. Um,
Yeah. So Gibson, not to belabor the length of this episode, but it all matters for what we're talking about. Gibson is really making themselves look really bad. And I don't know if they think they're playing the long game, but the long game they're playing is not good for them as a company, man. It's really not. Maybe people will start forgetting, but this is bad what they're doing. And eh, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this.
yeah,
You're
I mean,
always going
I
to
think
have
for
people
them,
that still want the real deal. But if you make yourself look like the monsters of the guitar industry, people will start looking elsewhere. You don't need to sue smaller companies out of business just to make sure you could still sell a Flying V with the name Gibson on that stock. There's always going to be somebody that wants to pay extra for that.
there is, but I mean, in terms of market, they want people like me to buy from them. Forget about it, because it's like, why do I want to give extra money to a bunch of jerks that are just going after designs that aren't even theirs, that's owned by that's like the icon of another company.
I don't know who they think they're winning, man. I mean, they're definitely not winning me over. If I decide I want another Flying V for the collection, I'm going to go get one from the 70s or the 80s. I'm not going to a guitar store and saying, which manufacturer is making the most authentic Flying V? I can't have somebody ripping off Gibson's designs because I have to worry about the interests of the private equity firm that owns the company. No, I don't care.
Plus, some better companies out there.
Yeah, it's nonsense, man. But yeah, I know I'm going on and on and on. But yeah, that's where things are at now with Gibson, and it is germane to this conversation about pointy shit guitars. Yeah,
Hey, hopefully one day it'll be a bad page in history book and Gibson will turn its ways around.
we'll see.
Or if not, well, we can all go buy flying V's from other companies.
Bingo.
All right, thank you again, Tommy. Although this did not end up on the best the high note. Do you want to close it on a high note?
I don't know. I'm kind of exhausted. I'll just say my pointy guitars kick ass. There you go. There's a high note.
All right, thank you again, Tommy.